Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Christopher Holmes, host for this episode and a member of the Black Doctoral Network. Now, today they have set me up for success. They have given me somebody that can speak the language that I love to speak, and that is about education. I am joined by a phenomenal woman. It's Black History Month. Maya Angelou, let's go. This woman, what's her name? Her name is Dr. Danielle Stewart. She is an author and she is president of iChange Collaborative. We're based right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, 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 Dr. Stewart.
Thank you so much.
Now, listen, I know that your work focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion. Listen, we're going to have a great conversation today. So let's just jump right in because I don't want to waste any time. Let's start with this first question. Tell the viewers and the listeners, where does it all begin for you?
Where does it all begin for me? Well, I'll say this. Long story short, is my background is I have always experienced and have been blessed with the experience of education in predominantly white institutions. And this is where it has begun for me because this ended up being my passion. And this will be a part of the story that I tell today about my personal and professional journey. And what I have learned is that you can definitely benefit from telling your story. And that is what I've done. And storytelling about my journey has allowed me to really understand and have compassion for those who I work with in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh my God. You just said something I probably said maybe 12 hours ago, and that is every educator that is committed and passionate about something has a story. So I can't wait to hear yours. So let's talk about this passion. Where did this passion for education come from?
This passion for education came from really just understanding that you don't have to be a scholar to understand and appreciate education. I had two parents who did not go to college right away. I was a first-gen college student in my household and never even realized it until one day I said, wait a minute, they didn't go to college. Okay. And so that passion for education was about you can learn in multiple places. And that really instilled in me the passion that comes with education and the perspective. And so understanding those two and appreciating that people who you come across in your life are not only going to educate you just in the classroom, but educate you in life skills. Mm-hmm. And also really appreciating the value of their perspectives, no matter if they're in a classroom, if they were a teacher for you, if they were a guardian. But bottom line is you have access to educational opportunities everywhere you are in your life.
I love it. From multiple places and from multiple people.
Yes.
Even the janitors in your school.
Absolutely.
Everybody is teaching every day.
Every day.
But so would you say that the opportunity to learn for everybody is really in their willingness and openness to receive what is coming out of other people's mouths?
Absolutely. And to just be in a position to listen. We're working and trying to make things happen. We're in survival mode. We do not take the time to listen and to value those who are around us. Mm-hmm. I will say this, COVID was probably a blessing in disguise because this forced us in some ways to listen to people we ordinarily do not take time to listen to and to appreciate the stories of survival and how they got through in times in moments of desperation that they had. So the generations really like the gaps were merged at some point, right? Yeah. And so the storytelling, which I often talk about, and I love telling stories, is about how do we educate people outside of the classroom? It's about telling the best practices, telling how you got over it, telling how you survived and made it through. That is what I value most out of anything in this world.
Yeah, I love the key word that you keep saying here, especially in your work, is value. Mm-hmm. It is simply value. You have value, and you have to understand that other people have value as well. Right. And I think another theme is coming out of this by the end. Go tell your story. I keep hearing it. Go tell your story. So I'm gonna stick with that, and I know that you're gonna keep sharing it. So I know you went to undergrad. You didn't major in DEI, in diversity and equity and inclusion. So where did you start? What was your main focus? Where did you get that undergrad degree in?
Yeah, so I attended Hofstra University, and my goal was to actually study communications. And so I worked in television and film for a few years. And I said, that would be what I do, and that's it. What I did learn, though, as I was studying, I was a big fan, as many of us are in the Black and well, around the world, but of the Cosby Show.
Yes.
In a different world.
Yes.
And what I remembered when I went to school is that one day, because I saw the credentials at the end of every show, William Cosby, EDD. I said, I don't know what that is, but I want that because I love TV and I love education. I just need to understand what all of this means. That's how my journey began. And so I went and lived in New York for a while because I'm from Atlanta. I'm a Georgia peach. And when I came back, I continued education and I committed to, even if I'm working full time, I always want to better myself. Yes. So then I went and got my master's in business because I wanted to at some point be an entrepreneur. And then after that, I said, I can't stop. I'm going to go ahead and get my doctorate in education. I don't know what I want to do with that. I don't think I'm fit to be in a classroom, but that doesn't mean, again, that I have to be in a classroom to teach others how to love education.
Yeah,
that is where it happened. The aha moment happened for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And really just taking that step. Like you said, I want it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with it, but I'll figure it out after I get it.
Well, let me tell you, after you've worked really hard to write your dissertation, and the last question they ask you is, what are you going to do with it now? You better start thinking hard because you put a lot of time and energy and effort into that research, right?
Yes. Yes. You know, I tell people all the time that they say, well, why did you get your doctorate? You know, why was that important to you? And I said to them, because this degree will be my life's work for the rest of my life. This is not something for a title because I don't need any more titles. This gives me expertise to go and do this for the rest of my life and help go change lives because that's my passion.
Absolutely.
And so I'm glad you made the decision. So you decide you're going to work in education, but not in the classroom, but you want to make an impact. And somehow you fall into this work. How did this happen?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that because I believe there are two things that happen in life. Either your work chooses you or you choose your work. And for me, work chose me. Wow. I went to grad school and I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. But part of my research was connecting with my old school, predominantly white school. And I said, you know, this is a great place. I had an interesting experience here. I was one of few students of color. I'm going to go back there and I'm going to do some research on understanding the experiences of students of color. And during that time that I went there to do just research, I came across an old teacher friend of mine, or a former teacher friend of mine, as well as a new teacher friend. And they had launched something called iChange Collaborative. And they had launched it in the classroom. And at that moment, they were putting together some fantastic things for educators and their students. And I said, well, can I do free research through you guys? So I started off as an intern. And we researched and were experiencing some great reviews about the research we were doing. People wanted to know more about the experiences of the current students and former students of color. Teachers wanted to understand how they could connect with their current students. So this was talking about perfect alignment. And started as an intern, then became a facilitator. And for the past 2 or 3 years, I have been president of the organization.
Wow. I mean, you talk about destiny, right?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's awesome. And you had no clue what you were about to land yourself into.
No.
So now let's talk about this work, because one thing I know, anybody who works in education, it is work of the heart. Yes. It takes something out of you. It leaves you empty sometimes, emotionally drained, especially in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there can be resistance.
Correct.
And it is that type of work when people leave, they leave in reflection. So let's talk a little bit about your experience in helping educators find value in what you bring to them in order to help impact what they do with students.
This is such a touching subject for me because part of what, as a woman of color, goes through is imposterism syndrome. Yeah. And that imposterism syndrome is you never feel like you're good enough. You're trying to understand how much harder you have to work to be seen as an equal or as an expert. So I knew personally, despite what anybody says to me in the world of education, by my experience alone as being a Black woman in a white world, I am already an expert. Yeah. Right. On top of that, me studying it makes me even more valuable. Yes. So going into the places I was going into, I not only felt the hurt and the stress and the strain of educators of color who were, navigating through these school systems and trying to understand, how do I become seen and heard and valued? But I also understood from the perspective of the educators who were not of color and wanted to get it, but they never really took the time to understand it from a voice of a person of color. Because what we miss so much in this world is censoring the voices of people of color.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so being able to establish that on behalf of not just myself, but other educators of color who may not otherwise have been able to see the opportunity to be heard, to be valued, to be seen, to be listened to. This is where the work and the magic has happened for me personally. So, when you talk about this being a passion, yes, it is passion. It's almost a form of ministry. When we go into places, we don't know what we're going to get. We don't know who has been harmed or hurt. We don't know who's about to walk out the door of their jobs because they felt like, this place is not for me. Well, you're right. People have said over and over again for generations that education was not made for people of color. Predominantly white institutions were not made for people of color. But I am a witness that, yes, we are entitled to be there. We should be there.
Yeah, most definitely.
We must continue to challenge those barriers.
Yeah. Oh my God. There you go. You said it was a ministry. I feel the power coming up out of you. And and you said this very eloquently because you walk in with your own story, right? And your own experience, and sitting in that room are 20 stories, 30 stories. And sometimes those stories are clashing as you begin to share. And we don't know how oftentimes when we tell our story, we begin to trigger things in people and they begin to remember. And like you said, for African Americans in this country, as an educator, your voice is often muted. And if you get a position, especially in a predominantly white institution, it's just your job to teach and keep your mouth closed, right? Don't speak up on behalf of other Black students. Don't speak up on behalf of students in poverty or Black or brown students. We don't need that voice. We just need you to teach. So here you are, beautiful Black woman walking in this door with a story, and you look at these faces and you see almost sometimes faces of fear. Yes. Because they're not quite sure how far you're gonna go. How far do you take them?
Well, one of our policies is lean into the discomfort. We teach compassionate listening skills. And one of those skills is lean into the discomfort. This is not supposed to be a comfortable conversation. We call them courageous conversations. People underestimate conversations.
Yes.
This is not for us to laugh and giggle and become friends. Mm-hmm. It is how to communicate. We underestimate the power of communication in the workplace. We underestimate the power of communication in the classrooms. Mm-hmm. That's one-on-one. You have to learn how to communicate first and foremost. Then you have to learn and be intentional on how you communicate with people across differences.
Yeah.
That is what we teach. And what I have learned, I have been in very uncomfortable places. And I've been in situations where I've said, oh, okay, now I have to practice what I'm preaching. Because to me, I do these workshops.
Yeah.
I never know what I'm going to get. But sometimes I'm being set up where they may ask me to now, let's talk. Now the teachers have talked. Now what are we going to do? The teachers want to say, well, what do we do next? You've got us all excited about the work, but we don't make all the decisions. So what's going to be next? How do we get the people in the dominant culture into the conversations? How do we do that? And that's where I have to lean into my own discomfort and say, well, let me figure out how to tactfully engage those people who I don't look like to come to the conversation. Yeah. Because oftentimes when these conversations are being established, it's not for the people, it's not for a certain group of people, right?
Right.
It's for us, for people of color who need a place to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But we're done talking about it. We want to see action.
Yeah.
There are people who are not of color who also are supporting and advocating in our allies and say, hey, I'm done talking about it too. I need this work to move forward. So my job as a facilitator, my job as an entrepreneur is to say, let me put myself in a position where I can be that liaison and communicate with those who are in leadership. Yeah. Those, it may look like white men. How do I engage them and invest them in this conversation? And that's part of the magic that happens, which is why I love what I do, because in this light, I am able to create the space and create the curriculum that's needed to reach the audience that needs to come to the table.
Yeah. And I love, you all's motto is that conversation is a revolutionary way of learning.
That's right.
It changes things if you engage in conversation.
Yes.
And I love, just kind of leading into deeper of the work that you do. The change has to happen, or will only be effective if the leader is involved.
That's right.
And we often see that leader does not look like you or I. And I know sometimes when we work in black school environments, we think, oh, well, this is normal. It's not normal.
No.
Most of the people that lead schools, let's say here in Georgia, go to a GACES conference. It's a bunch of older white men running school districts that Black teachers and Black students and Latinx people live and work in.
Absolutely.
And we have to ask ourselves, are they making decisions for those people that don't look like them, that don't share the same lived experiences? Right. They don't, more than likely. And that's where you come in. Now, how do you get to those tables with them?
It's not easy. It's definitely putting ourselves in places where we feel the need. And feeling the need is mostly like being available to the teachers. Yeah. They're so important to us. Again, I mentioned prior that Martha Caldwell and Oman Frame, who actually are the founders of iChange Collaborative, they did this as they were still teaching full time.
Yeah.
And so the level of compassion we have for educators is not, we get it. Mm. We understand what you're up against, and it's nothing compared to what's happening now in the midst of COVID. And that's a whole other conversation. But understanding that there are challenges yet and still that our teachers have, but the funding that comes to have people like me to come into places comes from the leader who says, I co-sign this. Yes. I'll sign the check to have them come in. And what we do is we support the leaders as well. See, people don't understand that. Like, leaders are up against a lot too.
Yes.
So a lot of the times when they challenge things like this, it's because there are 5 million other things that are happening and everything is a priority.
Yes. Yes.
So our compassion, and I am looking at it from a lens of a leader, is that I understand that you have a lot happening, but I also understand that if this is important to you as well, you have to do one thing first: make the time for it. Yep. Because you make the time as a leader for what those things are that are important.
Yeah. And what we're talking about here are cultures.
That's right.
And if you have a culture, this is just my opinion, if you have a culture that is not inclusive and diverse and values equity across the board to ensure access for learning and for teaching, you don't have a high performing culture that will be high achieving at all levels. Right. So what do you value the most? What do you value the most? And at the bottom line, it should be about your students.
Absolutely.
It should be your students. And so I think there are more people buying into the idea that I need to make this a priority, that diversity and inclusion is a real thing, equity is a real thing, access is a real thing. But because I believe it, will I get my people to buy into it? Because I have a staff that's 70% white, maybe 10% Black, 20% Latinx. They're the dominant culture here.
Right.
And I don't want to upset them.
Right.
I don't want to upset them.
Absolutely. Well, the magic happens as well, is really emphasizing the importance of the why.
Yeah. We
talk about the why. And when we go into organizations, even with the first call about the free consultation as to why you've called us, it's again, but why are you calling us? Because we're about transformational change. Yeah. And transformational change does not happen with one conversation. Nope. It doesn't happen with one workshop. And so understanding that people often think that it can be a one-time fix, but reminding them that that's not sustainable.
Yeah. How do you measure this? So let me ask you this. How do you measure this? Because I like the fact what you're saying, that you guys are selective. If somebody wants you to come in and say, we want a one-day training, you're going to say more than likely, that's not what we do. That's not what we do. We're looking to help transform your culture. But what are those measuring things that you're looking at? What are those factors that make you or give you the clue that this is supporting what we're doing with these teachers? They're getting it.
So one of the things is looking at the lens or the scope of who's in leadership positions. What do those leaders look like? Because a win for us is when you've listened to us and you've really opened up your eyes to, wait, we need to fill some of these leadership positions with people of color.
Yeah.
Who's on your board? What does that board look like?
Yeah.
Who's making the decisions? Who's in the conversations that you're having? Who's in the room? We always ask that question, who is in the room and why have they been chosen to be in the room? Is it because they say the right things, or is it because you really want them to challenge you all to make you grow and evolve into the organization that you want to be? Which is why we're here. We're here to coach you. We're here to hold your hand, and we're committed. We are just as committed as you all are committed as an organization. So when we come in there, the measurement is how many times are you making time for these conversations? How many people are showing up? Because often organizations aren't making these mandatory meetings. These are workshops that people can just opt in or opt out of. How many people are showing up? And we've seen it both ways. We've seen that everybody's in, all hands on deck, or we've seen where it completely dwindles the more workshops we have, because people realize, how often do we have to have this conversation about race? It's a never-ending conversation.
Yeah.
And the privilege is that you can actually ask that question. People of color have to talk about race almost every day.
Every day.
Every day. It's a part of our identity. Mm-hmm. But that also means, let's understand what talking about race means at the school or in an organization. Talking about race doesn't mean you're talking about racism.
Yeah.
That's the fear, right? But if you have a space that shifts the culture into welcoming and inviting and enjoying the joy about race and diversity, well, when there is an issue about racism, you're not having to scramble and panic and pay us thousands of dollars to come in to have a conversation, an uncomfortable conversation about race.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about being proactive.
Yes. And you're giving them skills. You're giving them the skills to have the conversation.
Sure.
And hopefully the leaders are leading those conversations, because they need to be at the helm to say, this is a focus and a priority for this school or for this district, as you said. I think the changing districts is in even a bigger lens that we need to take, but sometimes they're not ready, right? So it just could be a school in the district. And one thing I also want to talk about, and I started this conversation about 10 years ago in the classroom. I saw my student population changing, being more diverse. And remember now, I'm a Georgia peach as well. So right here in the Bible Belt. So my perception of what is right was locked and loaded, so to speak. And the diversity was not about black and white. It wasn't about gifted, regular ed, or special ed. I started seeing shifts in gender, sexual orientation, identity. And I brought this up. I never forget, I brought this up in the staff meeting. I said, I think we're going to have to start addressing this because we can't dismiss these students as if we don't see them and as if they don't have value. That was a decade ago.
Right.
I had no idea how fast the diversity of students was going to shift. And now here we are with one of the most diverse student population and teacher populations that we have ever seen.
Yes.
Have ever. Has that been part of the adjustment for you helping districts and school leaders bring in the acceptance of everybody who's in their building?
So this is funny you said that, because that's part of the challenge too, where you have organizations that are reluctant to talk about race, but then they want to then say, okay, but let's prioritize another agenda, which is fine because it's all important, right? It's very important. But understand that there are fundamental skills that we can teach you. Black resilience has paved the way for so many other
Yes.
movements.
Yes.
Black Lives Matter, then you see the Me Too movement, right? And so it's understanding, we're not saying anybody's better or anybody's got it worse. We're just saying you have to start somewhere. Get that part right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is the hardest part. This is the hardest. Getting started and sticking with the process is the hardest part. But when you can make the connection that if I can do this part right, if I can meet the needs of my people of color, if I can know how to center voices, I know what that means for all other groups that need to be centered and cared for. And those issues that come into organizations naturally can be addressed tactfully.
Yeah.
So you're, like you said before, you're learning the skills.
Yeah. And
because it's all going to come out at some point that, we need to clean this all up.
Yes.
And you can't clean it all up overnight. You can't get it right overnight. And this is one of the challenges we run into. By the time we have worked with an organization, we will find that either somebody finally says, listen, they're not about change. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to leave. Or the leader changes. If we find a leader who has been really into this work with us, at some point they may leave, and that happens. Leadership changes, as it should.
Yes.
But understanding that as leadership changes, the culture might shift as well, and that means this work we need to find out how to sustain this work.
Yes.
It's an investment.
Yes, that's the biggest thing. I mean, oh my God, because educational leaders and teachers change all the time. But right. What you're trying to make sure is that this work is sustained and it's a part of that school culture. I don't care who leads, the work stays, the skills stays, the priority stays.
Yes.
And sometimes it doesn't. And that's where we have to start all over again.
Yes.
Zero, and that's rough.
And the other part of it too is this. It is about understanding you will likely not get it right.
Yes.
But it's the effort that you put into it to make it right.
Most definitely.
We've worked with students of color. I mentioned this before. And part of our magic that happened was we brought students who were brave enough and felt safe enough through iChange Collaborative to come and to talk to educators who wanted to make it right, whether they had made mistakes before or they were fearful that they would make mistakes in teaching their students of color. But we bridged that gap and we brought a panel of students, a diverse panel of students, whether it was gender, age, race, sexual preference, all of those beautiful people who came to put themselves out there to speak. Mm-hmm. They spoke because they felt like this was a platform that they wanted and always needed. Mm-hmm. To tell teachers what they need to do to help future generations to get it right.
Yeah. Giving them the opportunity to tell their stories.
But that started when I began to tell my story.
Yeah.
I have to first put myself out there to understand what students may be up against, what the challenges are, the pain, deal with the reconciliation, and understanding that I am asking students to do the same thing. But I also know the reward. And the reward is now you have connected with the teacher who is going to make a difference in another student's life because you have told your story. There is value to your story already. Yes. But the value has increased by knowing that that teacher will never forget that story that you told because they will always remember why they need to do this work.
Wow. So let me ask you this. Who has made a tremendous impact on you in this work? So far in your career? And it can be more than one person, I'm sure.
Yes. So let me see if I can narrow that down. Well, first and foremost, my passion are the babies. There are students of color who look like me. And, again, it's just understanding that they're so hopeful. I remember knowing that there were some students when I started just working in this space who I had a Black parent. I had two Black parents, and I remember thinking like those kids, which was, well, I don't really fit in. I'm code switching or this, that, and the other. And I remember at the end of the day, my parents said, but you're there to get an education. And I remember hearing that same story years later from the students I work with, but I remember I'm here to have I'm just here. I never wanted to hear another kid say, but I'm just here.
Yeah.
Too much money is being invested for you to not have the quality of an educational academic experience like the others. So I always am motivated to make sure that students not only connect with other people who look like me, who graduated, who've made it. We appreciate the experience. There's stories that only we can understand because we can share those, but also there's the stories of perseverance. And we're not always talking about we're just the only Black person here. There are funny stories that we have too.
Oh, yes.
Right. We can write our own book.
Yes.
But those are the students that really motivate me to do the work. But also they're the students, the white students that I have a chance to really mentor. It may be the white kid who called somebody the N-word and they didn't really understand fully what damage they did.
Yeah.
And to be able to mentor those kids and for them to really appreciate, but also have the desire to say, I've learned something here in this conversation with Dr. Stewart. I can tell other white students what I learned.
Yeah.
And it's a form of appreciation. It's not condemnation at all.
Right.
But one of the other greatest things is working with teachers who themselves, they're in the classrooms, but they haven't dealt with their own issues of racism. And to, again, have conversations with them. I remember a man for 20 years, he held the story inside and we talked, I forgot what the question was. It was talking about a challenge about race or something, or a story about racism. He finally told his story after 20 years. And he told me, I just needed a safe space to tell you this story because I am so sorry of not intervening when I saw a person of color being harassed.
Wow.
And so you just never know what people bring to a space, but you also never know what they're going to leave with. Yeah. So that's why as a facilitator, it's important to really be a good listener and to put myself out there to be vulnerable enough that I can allow other people to feel vulnerable too.
But I love what you said when that you never know what they come with, but you never know what they're going to leave with. And I think what you guys do is create the space for them to leave with something.
Yes.
I don't know what that's going to be, but if you're open to it, everybody will leave here with something. And I think that's great work.
Yeah.
That's great work. So somebody's watching and they're listening and they're saying, I really love the work that she's doing. What advice would you give somebody who wants to do the work that you're currently doing?
Well, best thing I learned, and I wish I learned it earlier in life, was self-care and boundaries. First and foremost. So when you're interested in doing this work, and this is really life skills 101, but interested in doing this kind of work, really search your own self first. What journey have you been on personally? Because a lot of what we do is putting ourselves out there. Yeah. And even it's not even just about myself, but my partner in this work is a white female. And this is a relationship that you don't often see, a Black female and a white female working together as equals. But we have evolved in our relationship. Again, I started off as an intern. She has been my mentor. She has been my colleague. And now she has entrusted me in this beautiful work to lead it, to carry it on. Yeah. So find people in your network that you can trust, that you can be mentored by. Find those allies. You cannot possibly do this work successfully and talk about the importance of cross differences, relationships, and allyship, and you yourself are not on the journey to do that too.
Yes, most definitely. That's some great advice. And be willing to be uncomfortable because you're going to be.
You are going to be. You are going to be. And be forgiving.
Yeah.
Be gentle with yourself.
Great word. Forgiving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This word
I tell this to I'm sorry, but I always say this when we set up our first thing we do is set up safe spaces. What do you need to feel safe? And the first thing they say is I just non-judgment. I want to be respected. But I always leave people with this because there's always going to be a level of guilt that people feel. Yeah. They always say, oh, I feel awful after this conversation. I feel horrible. But what do you feel guilty about? So I always say, stop saying sorry so much and say I'm learning more because we're all in these spaces to learn.
I love that. And I would say in feeling guilty is not just something that people who are non-Black feel. Black people feel guilty as well because we sometimes say, I should have never allowed that to happen to me.
Right.
I gave them permission to treat me that way or speak
right.
to me that way, and I should have stopped it.
Yeah.
You're still learning.
Yeah.
You didn't have the skills to stop it.
Right.
And now you do. Well, hopefully you do when you leave the room after they kind of work with you.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit of what we do teach is just that. It's finding out where you are, being honest where you are, and let's build from there.
Yeah. What's your biggest accomplishment today?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I believe right now, aside from all the people that I still stay connected with and people who've said you changed my life, I've established, this is year 8 for an affinity groups of educators of color. We launched one in the state of Georgia, and now we're national. We mentor educators of color across the nation. We connect them to one another. It's a support group that we do provide services for throughout the year. And so our educators come and they talk about how important it is that they've been able to find a space where they can just really decompress, get solutions, and really like positive feedback, positive energy. When they're working in an environment that's not so positive and pouring into them, they come to our affinity groups, and this is where they get what they needed and what they were lacking. But even more importantly, one of the greatest accomplishments is our book. We've written a book about this type of stuff here. It's called Facilitating Conversations About Race in the Classroom. We work with both educators and corporations. So we have one coming out as well for corporations in the near future. But right now, the book that we have for educators, it is comprised of how to have those conversations. Everybody knows it's important. Everybody can say they, even if they don't believe it themselves, they know, yes, it's supposed to be important to talk about this stuff here, but no one talks about how. So we actually have met that need. We give you the tools you need from our own personal experiences, as well as just some of the ways, creative ways that you can engage in conversations, not only with students, but with other colleagues and leaders.
And listen, I mean, honestly, this work extends. If the schools really embrace this,
yes,
they can do this work with their parents.
And that's who we work with as well. That's one of the things that we've launched, parent discussions.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yes. It really does extend outside of the walls of the classroom in the school building.
Yes, it does.
So you're writing books, you're in here changing the world. You've got affinity groups with teachers of color. What's next? Where do you see your life, this trajectory taking you?
Well, I'll say this. We realize that what we do is not just about us, right? iChange is about creating other leaders, supporting other leaders. So we have opportunities coming up about facilitation training. So we are going to be teaching other people who want to do this work, not just with us, but beyond. Maybe we've got someone out there who says, I have always wanted to do DEI work. I don't know where to begin. Come to us, because we are about sharing the wealth of knowledge. We are all about making sure we can mentor other people and give back. So many people have poured into us, so we're always about paying it forward. So facilitation training is coming up for us. We actually have also launched an amazing opportunity and series for educators specifically, which is how to renovate your curriculum to be more inclusive. So we just concluded 8 months worth of training for educators that were up north in Delaware Valley. And we actually are going to do this again. So we're so excited because, again, it's not just about the conversations. It's about what are you doing in your classroom? Yeah. How are you changing this curriculum so students of color can see themselves more? Yeah. And we are finding that it's not easy. We know it's a lot to do, because if you are not familiar with this work, it's like you're going back to school again.
Yes. Yeah.
You can't change a classroom overnight. We're not expecting you to, but that's why we're here to support you. We're going to show you how to get it done. Yeah, I love it. I mean, your work is evolving. I see it. I see some conferences coming up. I see some national things spreading this message, because it is, again, as you said, it's a ministry.
that you all are so passionate about and you all are so committed to. So thank you for doing this work. You know, it is why we are so excited here at BDN to have members just like you out here being experts in the field, changing the world, but not keeping the knowledge inside, but helping to access or give access to what you know to people that really, really need it. So let's talk a little bit about your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network, how it has enhanced your career, what you are expecting to get from this relationship, anything of this nature since you've been with us.
So interestingly enough, when I came across the Black Doctors Network, I was desperately looking for a network like this and didn't know it existed. And I said, well, I probably need to create one if it doesn't exist. And at that moment, I found you all, and it was godsend, because understanding how few of us are out here in this world with a PhD or any type of doctorate. I believe it's 1 or 2% possibly. It's very, very little. There is a treasure in all of us. And so understanding that there are other people that look like me and probably understand what I'm going through, and platforms like this, who gets the opportunity to wake up to do what they love. On top of that, knowing that there is a network of other Black doctors.
Yes.
It has been the most rewarding experience. And I tell you, you're not just here taking members, but you're also providing workshops and resources and tools and events and opportunities. I am a research fanatic, and the fact that you all allow us to just tap into that skill set and to share our research, it gets no better than that.
Yeah. And we get to see each other at the table, and then
that's right.
Each other. It's like a crowd of cheerleaders that look like you.
Right. It's like I feel like I'm at home. I found my people.
Yeah. A lot
this is an affinity for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, we're excited to have you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for pouring out. Thank you for pouring in to others. Thank you for your sacrifice. And thank you for your yes to the purpose that has been on your life. You truly understand it. It has truly been a pleasure, Dr. Stewart. Would you please share with our viewers and our listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Absolutely. You can actually visit our website. iChange, it's the letter I, changecollaborative.com.
There you go. You guys got it. Go look her up. Go follow her on social medias. Go find her. And while you're going and clicking over there on iChange, come on over here to Black Doctoral Network and follow us on all of our social media channels. We love you guys. We thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure. Now, when you finish watching this, don't forget, come back next week and watch us again. And while you're there, go and tell somebody about the Black Doctoral Network and the Black Doctors Talk podcast. We thank you guys so much. Have a great, great day, and we'll see you next time.